I just don't think there's going to be a SKAN 5 and a SKAN 6. Rather, I think there'll be AdAttributionKit moving forward.
What is truth in advertising, and what are we learning from WWDC? Hello and welcome to Growth Masterminds. My name is John Koetsier. Do you trust what your ad partners tell you? If Google says it drove 1,000 app installs, do you believe it? What about Meta? What about TikTok? Almost everything these days is modeled as ad networks try to pierce privacy blind spots with data science. How reliable is all this stuff, and how much of the data science is actually scientific? Now, that's what we're going to chat about, and we planned that weeks ago, and we delayed this podcast by weeks. And guess what? It's WWDC today. And there's stuff going on. Apple released the documentation for AdAttributionKit and Web AdAttributionKit, as our guest found for himself this morning, which is a possible SKAN substitute replacement. So we'll probably chat about that stuff too. And to chat, we do have the CEO of DataSeat, David Phillipson. Welcome, David.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure to join your pub.
Hey, always a pleasure to have you. You know, I want to get into WWDC. I want to get into the stuff that you found, and we'll speculate a little bit. We'll make fools of ourselves because literally the keynote is in 90 minutes. So, but they didn't say anything about, SKAN or attribution or privacy in the keynote last year, except for maybe one throwaway line, or actually not even a line. It was an image. It was a picture, and we saw SKAN 5 in a list of other stuff that was still coming out. They didn't actually mention it, so maybe we won't make that big of fools of ourselves. But I want to start here, a little bit personal. How did you get into ad tech?
Oh, I thought we were going to dive straight into SKAN and
we will. But tell me a little bit about yourself.
Something about me. How did I get into ad tech? Very intentionally, but it was.
You're like the one person. You're like the one person who got into ad tech intentionally. Everybody else sort of fell into it.
I did. It's because at heart, I'm a greedy ass capitalist entrepreneur, or rather I was 20 years ago, right? I didn't ever idolize sports stars or Ronaldo. I didn't. I always looked up to successful entrepreneurs. And in the UK, it was Richard Branson. I remember reading Richard Branson's book and seeing him at a conference. And so as a younger man, I would sort out entrepreneurs and gain advice. And I remember one particular piece of advice that a successful entrepreneur gave me was, you're young and you're good enough. I was like, all right, thanks, you're good enough. Right? Choose your industry, because if you're good enough and you start early, if you just grind and you choose the right industry, you'll build huge success. And so my choosing of ad tech was very intentional. I knew nothing about it. I was a coder. I did a computer science degree, but I wasn't very good at it. And I knew I was better commercially and at sales. And actually, my best buddy from school was head of mobile at MediaCom in 2010. And he was telling me about all of these apps and SMS things that are going to be launching. And this is when all these, ringtones were coming out. And so it was the capitalist entrepreneur in me that said, I think that's high growth. And this very successful gentleman told me to start a business in something that was high growth. And I started an agency that then led to AdX tracking, which was one of the earlier MMPs. And that was how that whole journey started. So it was a ambitious entrepreneur that chose a high growth industry. That was my drive.
Way to go. I think by all intents and purposes, you've succeeded. That early mentor is great. You were good enough. And
then say, well, thanks for putting me into something that would tolerate my now 20-year career. It's one of the things I've discussed with Gaddy not so recently. But as an entrepreneur, you do the same thing for 20 years. If you're an employee, it's often your roles will change, your employer changes. But Gaddy and I, speak, very, very often actually, and you get the subject matter expertise from running businesses, because you can't change jobs, basically.
Wonderful. And Gotti, by the way, is the CEO of Singular, in case you were wondering who David was talking about. Okay, that's a cool story. I love that. That's awesome. Let's talk about WWDC. And literally, a keynote is happening in less than 90 minutes right now. Let's set the stage. SKAN 4 was announced in 2022. 2022. It's now 2024, and adoption is still around the 30 to 40% mark if you're lucky. There are some ad tech companies that are much higher, but if you look at the Metas of the world, you look at the Googles of the world, the TikToks of the world, that sort of thing, it's low. It's really low. It's hovering around 10 to 20% for those SANs, and it's not growing. And we saw I think it was WWDC last year, we saw that throwaway line, SKAN 5, nothing came out. And why would it? Because SKAN 4 hasn't really been adopted. Now, you found some documentation. We had heard about this before, but you had found some documentation that Apple released this morning. I believe it was this morning, about app at AdAttributionKit and web AdAttributionKit. That is a possible SKAN replacement. They're basically pitching it as something that will work for alternative app stores and the iOS App Store. But why would you have two frameworks that basically do the same thing?
I don't, quite right is your question, and I don't think there will be two. I don't think SKAN will be deprecated or removed. I just don't think there's going to be a SKAN 5 and a SKAN 6. Rather, I think there'll be AdAttributionKit moving forward. In the documentation, I shared it on LinkedIn just earlier, it refers to the features that were named for SKAN 5. It even mentions that re-engagement measurement as part of that AdAttributionKit is mentioning SKAN 5 features. So I think this will be discussed for sure within WWDC. So all eyes and attention there. And it also makes sense not to have two. AdAttribution WebKit was for browser, was for web. In SKAN 4, we included mobile web tracking. So it almost didn't make sense to have these two kind of parallel track. And then I think some sensible person within Apple said, well, let's just standardize on one. And then actually that may be a route to high adoption and higher success, but especially considering some of the challenges that you just highlighted, low adoption rate. Although, John, I'd love just to address a moment of that. I can understand why you quote low adoption rates, because you look at Meta, Google, TikTok, they were largely against, remember. I measure something else with SKAN 4, and that is every other publisher out there, every other programmatic publisher out there, and we're at 70 to 80%. So 70 to 80% of bids that we receive as a DSP are SKAN 4 compatible. If we just go to, Meta, Google, are your impression SKAN 4 compatible? Well, you've got to remember they are intentional laggard. So the intentional laggard shouldn't be the base measurement, of how widely SKAN 4 has been adopted. I appreciate your quote, and I think it's accurate, but there's another world, which is every other app out there besides Meta, Google, and TikTok, which is, the internet outside the walled gardens is quite SKAN 4 compatible. Just worth a note.
And I'm so happy you said that, because not only is it a great segue to where we're going, but it's also perhaps the linchpin of what we're going to talk about, which is this modeled reality that we're seeing right now. So this is really interesting to me. And this is something that I've been wondering about. You saw probably Eric Sefer's article, I think it was last week, SKAN 4 has failed. And his conclusion is SKAN 4 has failed. It has not been adopted. And it's not working because the level of adoption that I mentioned is so low. You correctly identified, and that is 100% correct. If you see Singular's SKAN 4 adoption tracker, you see a lot of ad networks. You see a lot of platforms that are using SKAN 4 to a high level. Now, they're not the biggest ones, the Google, Meta, TikTok, but they are the other ones. Are we seeing a bifurcation of the market here, where you're seeing adoption of SKAN, and that it is an ad attribution framework that works deterministically? It's not granular, but it works on the open internet, the open web, the open ad ecosystem, versus the massive legacy ad platforms, social platforms, search platforms that are basically modeling for results. Are we seeing that bifurcation?
Possibly. There's other details I'd just like to add, John. The friction's definitely there, and there's been different factions with the industry either adopting or pushing things forward or putting their brakes on. However, I think the biggest friction comes from the fact that many advertisers still are adopting or using or relying on probabilistic attribution. IDFA was there. That was the turn to. It was deterministic, as accurate as in real time. SKAN was offered, forced onto them, but there was a fallback mechanism that still almost replicated deterministic IDFA attribution. That was there. If that was there, the majority of marketeers just remained there. And there was SKAN 2, SKAN 3, lots of advertisers and organizations invested a lot into that, but it was never widely adopted because the fallback mechanism was there. If probabilistic attribution across the whole of the industry was removed on day one, SKAN would have been enforced, and I think SKAN adoption would have been far higher. And if all advertisers were going to Meta and TikTok and Google and saying, we use SKAN, we need you to adopt it as well at great length, then I'm sure they would have, to that level of detail. I want to answer your question directly as well and not just keep having...
It's all good. This is great context.
Side notes, Joe. This is why I enjoy these conversations, because I hear your perspective and, you get to hear mine, and then it widens our perspective and opinion. There's been a lot of discussion about AEM, aggregate event measurement, with Google. They even have advanced data sharing with some MMPs. And they ask you to turn advanced data sharing on, to allow their modeling to run. But if you actually study that detail, all that is allowing is all of this data that is used for fingerprinting and probabilistically matching to be shared with Facebook behind the scenes, with Meta behind the scenes, to be shared with Google behind the scenes. And for sure, they do some modeling, and they'll then be counting installs as well within their dashboard, but not using SKAN. So I feel that there's a bit of headline, kind of salesmanship saying, well, share all this data with us, we're modeling, but then you're actually counting installs as well. And you're counting installs at a far higher number than SKAN is counting. That to me stinks of probabilistic matching. I may not be sticking to the script here, but I don't have a dependency on any of these large faction on our industry, kind of map. But I think the best thing that can happen for our industry over the coming months will be quite a strong enforcement from Apple to stop a probabilistic ban. I think features enhanced in AdAttributionKit. By the way, I think they're coming. In that documentation, it mentions they will be measuring different creative types: banner, video, interstitial. Mm-hmm. You see one of the widest criticisms of SKAN. It doesn't differentiate between a banner and a rewarded video, albeit the price is 20x the difference. So I think feature improvements in SKAN are going to come. I think probabilistic ban will happen. Advertisers widely adopt SKAN. It still has its clear pitfall. The data is vague intentionally, which I then think means that we need media mix modeling and different incrementality technology. So I think it will be a mixture of the three, but I do not think, Eric is a friend of mine. I'll happily disagree with him on air. I'll agree with him. SKAN 4 hasn't been a success. I believe that Apple and the industry will make a success of this mission of SKAN, albeit I think it will be called AdAttributionKit. Not quite rolling off my tongue yet, John, but
it's not rolling off my tongue at all. I'm completely failing to say it. Every time I try and say it, I'm completely stumbling. I hate these framework names that Apple has created. We all learned SKAdNetwork, and now it just rolls off the tongue. I guess the same will happen with AdAttributionKit. See how slow I have to do it to make it work? And web AdAttributionKit, but it'll take a little bit of time.
So yes, otherwise I need to, but I'm often told to slow down on these podcasts. Apparently I'm talking fast, so these long acronyms will slow me down. But I do think that's what will happen. I think that Apple have invested too much into this privacy compliant attribution system. I think the fixes will be enhanced. It will be enforced. It will be adopted by ad networks, walled garden, advertisers and publishers widely over the coming months, and certainly over the coming 12 months. It still leaves fundamental gaps, though, that can be filled with, I would say, with more strategic planning tools, such as MMM or media mix modeling. Although I don't think any one solution really addresses all of a marketeer's needs. Unlike what we used to have, which was IDFA deterministic tracking, but arguably even that wasn't good enough, because you want multi-touch deterministic attribution, and that was never possible because the likes of Meta and Google would never accept MMP's trackers for multi-touch attribution. Anyway, I can go off on any angle, and I'll probably end up having a rant at Meta and Google at some point, but
it is all good, and there are so many places we could go here. This is a target-rich environment right now. I want to follow up on one thread that you talked about, and
Sure.
that was where Apple's going. Apple can kill fingerprinting fairly easily, one would think, by masking a variety of device attributes, masking a variety of using VPN technology, which it has as part of the Apple One subscription and other things like that. So I don't know if it's fairly easily. That I might have overstated there, but Apple can do a lot more to
I think
make
it's easy, but very expensive. And the expense of putting app traffic through a private relay VPN would cost more than Bitcoin in server cost. So.
Exactly. So that there are things that Apple can do there that Apple can do technologically rather than by fiat, by guideline, by, App Store guideline, that sort of thing. I want to segue from that or continue from that to the fact that Apple over the past year, maybe 18 months, killed its MMP program. So Apple had a program just like Meta does, just like other big platforms have. TikTok has one, Google, where you have certain levels of partnerships where MMPs can get specific data, additional data, special data access. And Apple had a program like that, not necessarily to share data, but for MMPs to be part of. They killed that. And that was an intentional, in my opinion, step back away from being kind of the arbiter how things work and more towards a technological solution. Does that make sense to you?
It does. I wasn't aware of that change in policy, but so Apple had an effort of division, the team, whatever, to partner with MMPs essentially.
Yes. Yes.
And so I was absolutely aware that Meta or Facebook did. They notoriously banned Tune back in the day. So they had the power to devastate an MMP. But I wasn't aware of Apple. Now I assume this was more around to ensure accurate measurement of ASA, of Apple search ads. I imagine most of these kind of ad networks would have that team to make sure that they were being measured correctly.
Yeah, that was a piece of it, and it was also just about kind of policing the MMP ecosystem, I think. And there's more that I could probably dig into about that, but that was interesting to me as I moved into these. There's another thread I want to pull on that you talked about, and that was the no one solution works for everything. And of course, that aligns with what Singular's been talking about for some time, which is unified measurement, which is taking multiple measurements of lots of different things, and then we're creating a modeled reality. We're even adding some MMM and incrementality into that. This is a complex world for marketers if they have to navigate it alone. But it's the reality we're in post IDFA, and it's going to be post GAID as well on Android at some point. I mean, the third-party cookie has been extended. It's had its execution canceled or delayed like 3 or 4 times, right? 4 or 5 years now. But at some point, that'll go away potentially, and certainly the GAID will as well.
Yes, yeah, I agree. But I think there's different user cases of different types of advertisers, different size of marketing teams. And I'll give you an example. If you and I, John, just started a new business, you seem quite mindful. Let's say that you started a meditation app, just next month, absolutely, John's meditation app. And if you just raise some
Heard it
money,
here first.
you wouldn't be doing media mix modeling. You wouldn't. You'd raise some money, you'd run some ads on TikTok, on Meta, on Google, and of course some DataSeat, some privacy compliant, contextual UX. But no, my point is that you would, if you're running on iOS, you'd probably be using Singular as MMP, and you'd be using SKAN to measure how those channels are performing. You don't need media mix modeling. Let's say then your app was hugely successful, and then you raise a load more money and you increase your budget to $1 million the next quarter. At that point, you're adding several more channels to your media mix. You should then start doing some incrementality analysis. You should, because as you add more and more channels, you want more scale, you can afford it, you've raised a load more money, but you then need to start making sure that SKAN data, yes, it's attributing it to to these ad networks, but how incremental is it? So that's when, as your business scales, you've then got some last click multi-touch attribution as stage one. You then want to do some incrementality analysis as your budgets grow, to make sure you're being as efficient as possible. The next phase, you're at Series B, John. You've suddenly got a $100 million valuation. You've raised $20 million. You're going for it this year. You've been hugely successful. You're running digital out of home. You're running some CTV. Your database is huge. You're running email campaigns, SMS campaigns. You've got some sponsorship. You've got some influencers out there. This is where SKAN data isn't going to suffice. Or rather, you could survive using that, but you're not going to thrive. You then want to be doing some incrementality analysis on top of it. And this is where you as a one-man band isn't good enough anymore, John. I'm sorry to say. You've hired a CMO. You've hired an experienced CMO that's got a VP of growth. This CMO needs some strategic planning tools. That, to me, is where media mix modeling comes into place. It's not to optimize the campaign. You can still your UA growth manager can still optimize the campaign with SKAN data or with MMP data on Android. Incrementality analysis, the UA VP of growth still uses, but the CMO and the CEO and the board would approve, data investment strategies that comes from MMM. So that's how I think we should look at these three different capabilities. Media mix modeling is more strategic planning. Where do I allocate budget? I'm not going to tell you that this creative from this publisher has a far higher IPM. That is, so they're different tools for different things, but they are very complementary, but they're not all required. And it depends on what stage of business you're at and how much you're spending, how big your teams are. Does that make sense? I wanted to.
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense, and it aligns with how I'm thinking. And I'm also super happy to know that I'm going to be a success finally. And I'm going to hire a CMO, and he's going to have all these, cocktail lunches, 3 cocktail lunches.
Didn't get impressed, John. Just like that advice I got from the gentleman 20 years ago. I think I'll say sorry to Gaddy and singing out. I'm sorry, but John is off raising money, this mindfulness meditation app.
Richard Branson, I already have a connection. I have an in. You read the book, so you can introduce me. It's all good. It's going to happen. My ship has finally come in. This part of the conversation reminds me, I don't know if you saw what Nebojsa Radovic, he leads UA at Zynga, recently wrote on LinkedIn, and he also wrote a fairly long Medium article. And I'm trying to source some data for his next installment. Actually, he asked for a little bit of data. But what's really, really interesting is that at his level, which aligns with some things that you're talking about, when he's looking at what he wants from SKAN, he doesn't want the granularity that we lost with IDFA. He wants more detail on ad types and what's happening with those so that he can optimize quicker. And he's not getting the level of data that he needs about what's happening with his ads. It's interesting if you think about it, because on the Android side with Privacy Sandbox, he's going to get so much more detail about all that stuff. There's so much more upper funnel detail that Privacy Sandbox will provide. And if he can get a little more of that, he's fine with SKAN. Actually, he's okay with it. And of course, at his level, he's using a lot of the other tools you mentioned as well around incrementality and MMM and all that stuff. But he's saying, hey, I can use SKAN. I need a little more, and that would help me optimize on the small scale. And he's probably using the other tools on the large scale.
I think he's going to get some of his wish list. If top of his wish list was the delay, I want the data quicker. I don't think he's going to get that.
That's right. He was not happy about the delays, exactly, because the optimization gets thrown off.
So the best way to obfuscate data, the best way to make something less identifiable, is to skew the timeline. If you just think of every single ad tech chart out there, what is the x-axis? It's time. All right. So if you add some noise to time, it's the best thing for privacy. I think that's probably the lever. The Apple's best privacy lever is just adding some noise to time, and that's what the 24 to 48 hours does. We're used to knowing what they clicked on the ad here and then they installed here, and this is my click to install time. The noise there is always going to be that. That's my thought. I agree with Nebo. I wish there wasn't the delay, but I think that's going to remain. So if you then move down his wish list, I also studied it. I'm adopting SKAN, and it's part of my proposition. So I even acknowledge the positive bias. But I'm also an optimist and positive by nature. You wouldn't start businesses unless you're an optimist by nature. You've got to think things are just going to work out, otherwise you never take any steps forward. Yes. So delays, we're always going to have them. The next thing on his list was creative type, because he hated the fact that SKAN would attribute an install equally to a 320 by 50 banner to what it does a 30-second rewarded video that is paid a lot of money for, right? Yeah. So this is today. This is hot off the press. Although the timing of this podcast wasn't planned, the AdAttributionKit documentation.
You did it.
Was published in the last 24 hours, and it mentioned this. It just goes to show that one of the reasons we do these podcasts, I believe Apple listens. I don't think Apple is evil. I think they want privacy, but they also are supporting some of this. I think those enhancements come from people like you and I doing these podcasts, come from Nebo putting really professional papers together and making a business case as to why it is required. We will get creative type, I believe, in the new version of AdAttributionKit. So the other things, though, that I think there are still positives that Nebo doesn't point out with SKAN that we're going to continue to have. We've got multi-touch attribution, including Meta and Google. They would never play ball with the MMPs, given us multi-touch. Mm-hmm. We have re-download counts. Imagine for your meditation app, where your first version was a bit flaky, John, but then a year later, you've updated it. This version's flying. You do a big push, and then actually people are re-downloading it. Imagine if you're dating or hyper-casual, accurate re-download, I think is there that isn't typically within MMP. And of course, publisher transparency. How long ago would it be where Nebo would be reaching out to a bunch of ad networks saying, can you share a publisher list with me? And they'll give you a bunch of hashed gobbledygook. It wouldn't say which publisher. They'll just give a bunch of random numbers. So there's lots of benefit, which is why I believe this is going to get improved. It will then be enforced. It will get adopted. And we'll have another one of these in a year's time, and we can discuss how wrong I was or how right we both were.
I love the optimism, and I love the realpolitik, essentially, of saying, hey, there is actually value here that we're not getting elsewhere. That's good. And so this framework moving forward, whether it's called SKAN, SKAdNetwork, SKAN 4, SKAN 5, or AdAttributionKit for app and for web, has some value. That is super interesting. What the other super interesting thing that I'm taking out of this episode as we kind of wind it down here is, this semi-bifurcation of kind of the open internet, the open app and web ecosystem versus the closed, the walled gardens, and how that progresses. And yet, as you mentioned, SKAN will give you, or web and app AdAttributionKit. We'll give you some data on those downloads on the iOS side at least. Super interesting. Any last hits? Any other predictions for WWDC?
I've got a topic, and I think it's something all advertisers should do. And I think that all advertisers should hold the big walled gardens accounts to SKAN data. There's so much chat in the public domain about, well, why SKAN data's like this, but Meta and others, accounting up here. Well, SKAN should be seen as a source of truth. It is deterministic. It has long attribution window. It does. It has 30-day post-click and 24-hour post-view. So if anything, it's generous. But
yes,
it is one version that it can be applied to all. So just because you turn AEM on or advanced data sharing, with Meta, I think still hold them to account to SKAN data, because I think that is the only consistent source of truth that we're going to have as advertisers. And eventually, I think this could be enforced on Meta anyway. We talk private relay. Apple does have the ability, to start routing at traffic that will remove an IP address that will stop any of this modeling that they're doing anyway. But if you shouldn't just trust any ad company saying this is how much value I've driven you. This is the very reason why MMPs existed in the first place, John. This is why Gaddy started his business. It's why I started a business 15 years ago. Ads companies, I am one, should not be trusted 100% to count their own value. That is what MMPs are there for. And MMPs will invest a lot of money in developing features and tools to represent SKAN data in a very, in a consistent way. And then you take the MMP MMN modules and some incrementality tests. That should be your source of truth, not a big media giant saying, look at how brilliant I am. Give me more kudos. Anyway, that's mine. I only know. I think there is an ability to measure all with the same stick.
Love it. Love it. Love it. We talked before we hit the record button about you getting in trouble with your board for dropping an F-bomb or something like that. That didn't happen yet. You might get in trouble for saying, don't trust us. But I think that's a very realistic and a very generous way of looking at the world.
I'm being consistent, by the way. And, we're good people. We turn up, we work hard, we want to deliver value for our clients. I'm just being consistent. And, if I'm an advertiser, I would always want to go to the single independent source of truth, as opposed to take their word. That was my only. And I'll put myself in the same bucket because I don't want anyone to think I'm being biased or negative towards them in particular. I'm just being quite black and white against. You've got advertisers that are spending money, and you've got ad networks that are receiving that money.
100% appreciate it, David, and enjoy each one of our conversations. I think I got to insert a bug into your systems and maybe Gaudy's systems, record some of those conversations and then publish them, and we get more insight. But I want to thank you for taking this time. It was a great pleasure. And guess what? WWDC is in 55 minutes from now. The keynote is. And we'll find out maybe if we're wrong on a few details or right on a bunch of details. I think we're going to be more right than wrong, but that's just me.
Great. Let's publish this soon then, John. All right. Thank you so much.
I'm going to publish it today.